Welcome to Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to resilience, business continuity, crisis management, anything that helps you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Alex Fullick there. I'm really easy to find, and I do respond to everything I get. As you can tell, it's that time again. I'd like to welcome back Regina Phelps. Regina, welcome back.
Alex, thank you so much. It's such a great pleasure to be with you as always. And now we're almost at the end of 2024. So, wow, we have a lot we could talk about, don't you think?
What, did something happen in 2024? Like, it's been rather peaceful, hasn't it?
Oh my gosh, it's been crazy. I don't, maybe in Canada it's been peaceful, but so much down here and lots of other places.
No, it hasn't been peaceful up here either lately. Not at all.
Well, since we are talking at the end of the year, I thought it would be great fun in the way that I guess I like to have fun to talk about 2024 and some things for us all to chew on, given what we all do for a living. So I think what I'd like to do is I have a sort of a list of things I want to talk through, and you and I are going to banter back and forth about those, and then we can kind of then look to 2025 and see what might happen then. How's
Okay,
that sound?
sounds good.
Okay. So the first thing that I think about when I think about 2024 is I think about the impact of what's happening worldwide to governments and the move to autocratic leaders in many parts of the world and governments that are failing or really struggling and ones that are actually frankly surprising, like France is a good example, and the collapse of their recent government. And the acquisition of a new prime minister. We'll hope that works out. They did a great job with Notre Dame, but their government's having some tough times.
Yeah.
And then also Germany, the fact that the German they had a vote of no confidence, and the chancellor is now tossed out, and they're now going to be having a new leader, and that's quite different. Remember, Angela Merkel was what she was the chancellor for what, 16 years or something. So they have really, really struggled. And these are large allies historically of the United States. But there's so much other percolating of this same issue. I mean, if you also look at the different elections that have occurred in different states within the European Union, there's also been the rise of the right in every election. And so that's also a huge shift. And this also ties back to many conversations that you and I have had about the instability of government post-pandemic, which, by the way, happened after the 1918 through 1922 flu. And we are just living the same thing. And I've talked about this a lot, and it's just horrifying to see it actually happening. And then, like, for example, places that had been relatively stable for some time, like South Korea. Like, what was that whole martial law thing?
Yeah, that came out of the blue.
Out of the blue. And that is a huge, important partner of the US and, frankly, the European community as well as Canada, um, in the issue of the stability that they have in that part of the world. And all of a sudden, one of our very stable allies seems to have sort of gone off their rocker. And so he was eventually impeached, but their impeachment's not like it is here in the US, where then you can be tossed out. Now it has to go to a court, and it takes about 6 months. So this guy who declared martial law was seemingly kind of an unstable person, is still running that country, which I find a little unnerving.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, right?
Oh, I think you're right about post-pandemic. It's everything that people didn't like that happened through the pandemic. You find people that are opportunistic and then
Yes.
find those little things that they can pick on
Yep.
and point to and say, well, that's the reason, and then build
Right.
their case to be elected.
Mm-hmm.
So we go from one extreme to the other,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Mm-hmm.
what you said, it happened after 1918 as well. We
Right.
went from one extreme right to the other, and then back over again to something more comfortable. And that's
Right.
where we are in a lot of these places. We went from the pandemic. Now we've got all these opportunistic people, politicians and billionaires who are finding their have found their voice and their way to get their message across
Right.
to play on people's fears so they can get what they want. So everybody swings to the other side
Mhm.
because, hey, yeah, I am concerned about XYZ or whatever the topic is.
Mhm.
And then you get these people in who do what they want, and who knows what's going to happen. It makes things unstable.
Absolutely. And when you think about it, and we look at how we trade, when you look at where your products come from, when you look at supply chain issues, all of this may not impact us this moment, but it could impact us in the near or foreseeable future. And I think this goes back to what you and I have talked about many, many, many times, which is the fact that those of us in our profession need to have a very wide view of what's happening in the world because it all can impact us in ways that we can't even imagine.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't think people in our industry, we've moved beyond the binder of a
Oh my
continuity
gosh.
plan or a crisis management plan or whatever. We're now looking at the globe.
Yes.
You're looking at the entire library. Forget just the binder. You know,
No, totally.
you have
Absolutely.
to have a not a full understanding of everything because nobody can be like that, but
Right.
you have to really be looking back and forth, like driving a car. You've got to look
Right.
off to the side. Is there any dangers coming my way? And how do you deal with it nonstop? It's not just looking straight ahead and with pinpoint accuracy and ignoring what's off to the side. You can't do that anymore.
No, situational awareness, right? We've
Yeah,
talked about many times. But there's more I want to just sort of throw in this hamper of things that I think are just widely disturbing. One of them, actually, I just saw this study, and I'm looking into my note here, that the UK just got their first real damage report from Brexit. 27 million pounds lost over the last 2 years from them accepting to get out of the EU. And again, look at stability, look at trading partners, look at people being able to contribute, all of those things.
mhm.
And then we have $27 billion pounds, excuse me, being lost because of that exit from the European Union. And so many people in the UK so unhappy now about that decision because of the difficulty of doing anything with the European Union because it requires all of what they used to have to go through. Every country has to be dealt with individually, and you have to go through all of those deals related to import and export and blah, blah, blah. And so that's really had a huge impact on the UK, which of course is a very important partner for free countries around the world. And they're really still struggling and they will probably struggle for I don't know how long. I wonder if they'll ever make the decision that they want to get back in the EU, but maybe the EU may not want them, which is probably a whole nother discussion, right?
Could be. I know when I was in the UK recently, a month and a half ago,
Mhm.
for the BCI conference, I was visiting family and I ran into other people as well while I was at a football match. I was talking to people there, and many of them said that they don't like Brexit. They don't like what's happened. They feel like they were lied to. Those
Mhm.
that did vote for it, they said we were lied. We were promised, the moon, and we got a lump of coal.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but it goes back to what I said too, opportunistic people who thought they could get what they want. They benefited,
Right.
people didn't.
Right. And that's and this sort of wraps around other things I want to talk about, but the idea of misinformation and disinformation,
Yeah,
which was heavily happening with Brexit. And there was a huge effort on the part of the Russians in particular in the misinformation, disinformation campaign that they did leading up to the election, which probably had a big impact on whether people voted to leave or stay.
yeah.
And so that goes back to, again, this incredibly connected universe that we have, which is good and bad. And that's a really good example of that. The other thing when I begin to think about what's been going on this year that's also disconcerting to me is China. China is actually really struggling economically. And you may say, well, you know, so what? It's a big deal that they're struggling economically. Now, they were for a long time, for the last few years, they were building apartment buildings ad nauseum everywhere, even if people didn't want them or need them. And I saw last year, I haven't seen the stats for this year, but there were something on this on the order of 23 million apartments that had been built that were empty. That was in The Economist. And I thought, oh my God. So all of this construction to keep, again, people employed, economy, you know, money moving back and forth, heavily financed by the government, providing developers. So now the economy is slowing substantially in China. They're getting nervous and kind of moving around. They've been really pushing the Philippines recently. Think of how many call centers are in the Philippines for countries all over the world. Think about what exports and imports come out of that region. There's a lot of anxiety about what China is going to do, especially with Trump and the rise of, again, you know, some comparison to Putin, right? And so I'm very concerned about the fact that their economy is doing poorly, because that will also impact the politics of the region and the whole supply chain related issue, potentially again. And there's so much writing right now about that in many of the political affairs and The Economist and so on, really hand-wringing about what's going to happen with them.
When I was in China back in 2009 for the International Emergency Management Society Teams conference, we saw some of these big apartment blocks, and they weren't just apartment blocks. It looked like small cities that were built to house people, and yet most of it was completely empty.
Right.
They weren't letting the local people move into them. And now, I don't know if you saw this, but I saw a headline just the other day that a lot of these big buildings that were built fast to keep the economy going are sinking and starting to fall apart.
I've seen that. The infrastructure was poorly done. The plumbing is failing. The pipes are breaking. The whole, yes.
Yeah.
Oh my God. So now you've got some awful building that no one's ever going to want.
Yeah. And it's
Right?
becoming a danger. And now you're going to have other things to deal with, like
Right.
the crumbling infrastructure.
Right.
Not just within the building, but you know, in the whole community as a whole. The infrastructure there was done so fast that the whole, you know, big area.
Sewer systems, electrical, all of that, right? Yeah.
None of it's up to par.
Yep. The other part about the China piece that I think is important, that affects every single person in the universe, is Taiwan. So again, the big concern about what's going to happen with the change of leadership in the United States is the issue related to Taiwan. And you may say, well, okay, Taiwan's a little piece of dirt, you know, to the side of China. It's true. It's a very small island, but it's also the home of TSMC, which is the largest semiconductor manufacturer in the world. They produce 60% of every chip used in every single thing worldwide, and 90% of all the high-end chips. There have been many studies that have been done. If the TSMC disappears from Taiwan or is acquired by the Chinese, that there could literally be a worldwide depression, because there's no other place to get a majority of that stuff.
Yeah.
And that is a significant issue that's always been there for the taking, I suppose, but has really become more and more problematic and could have a huge impact in our work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've talked about that before.
Yes, we have.
And all the impacts that it could have on companies, organizations, financial institutions. You know, if you're trying to upgrade, or even if you're a new business trying to get started, you can't get the stuff you need to grow and move.
Because think of a chip being in everything, right? I mean, if you opened an office, where would you get your computers? How would you get even lighting? And so there's so many chips in everything.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to fathom what the impact would be. And that is closely tied to China not doing well, big government changes through the United States. So there's a lot at risk here.
Yeah.
Then we have the ongoing issue with Gaza and Israel, which is this horrific war, which is continuing to grind on, which is horrifying from a humanitarian perspective. And I know they keep saying that a ceasefire or a settlement is close at hand, but every day they still are bombing many buildings, killing many people. And so I don't see an end to that in the short term. I guess the only good news I can say about the global situation is that Syria, finally was able to amazingly and rapidly get rid of its dictator, which is great. But that also creates a feeling of just general instability, more instability in the Middle East. It's great that Bashar is gone, but what does that mean? How is that new government going to work out? What does that mean with all the other players in the region, and what kind of instability that
Yeah,
could have, right?
that one came out of nowhere as well. You
Absolutely.
heard, you heard the rebels, as you know, for lack of a better way, that was the way we distinguished government
Right.
and rebels. Uh, Suddenly just appearing, they took over a city, and the next thing you know, by the end of the week, it seemed like they had
The
toppled
entire
the government.
country.
It's like, what happened?
Right.
And then now you've got this vacuum
Mhm.
of no real political stability, and other nations like Iran, and et cetera, looking over, going, do we have an opportunity here?
That's right.
Or anyone else too, do we have an opportunity to step in here and fill the void? Isn't because I believe that's what happened in Afghanistan
Hmm.
way back when the Russians were gone, and uh,
Right. In the 80s. Right.
they stepped in, and there was turmoil, and until some stability started to get there, and then turmoil again, and they're going through what they're going through now.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think that all of that just is another churn in the Middle East, which is complicated in its own right. And then I think the other sort of thing from the political issue across the world is the impact of the Trump election
Yeah.
and his signaling about protectionism. And, that's going to be a really big deal when he takes office, and because no one really knows exactly what's going to happen. But if he even uses remotely some or part or all of Project 2025, there's a lot in there related to the impacts of us and how we will deal with the rest of the world. And there's a good chance that we will, as he has said, at least in his campaign speeches, that he would pull us out of many things. And so that would not only continue to damage our reputation globally, and not being a very trustable partner, but then also have huge economic impacts that could affect all of us in business. So I think just geopolitically, this has been a pretty horrific year in many ways. I mean, there's been some good things, but a lot of it's been very disconcerting to me. And then what the heck is going on in Canada?
Well, let's piggyback off of what you just said about the US
Yeah.
election. Um,
Yeah,
there's
what are we
lots,
doing with Canada and the United States after this election?
there's lots going on up here, all
Yes, I
kinds of
bet.
conversations. Obviously, the 25% tariff is a big talking point up here, right across the country.
For
And
sure.
we've got premiers, like state governors, premiers across the country coming up with plans to deal with it.
Hmm.
Some have suggested, like the province I'm in, of shutting off the energy that goes to the US. They said, you want
Well, hey,
to charge us that,
what
we're
goes
going to shut
around
it off.
comes around, right?
Yeah, and others have suggested, because we have so much fresh water up here, shutting off the taps. And people obviously would not like that one. So there's all this going on right now. It's the joke that was made about Canada being the 51st state
Mm-hmm.
has actually started to
Yeah.
make some people say that the US is no longer an ally of Canada,
Mm-hmm.
that they're not friendly anymore. And I did a look at this, that tourist bureaus now are seeing less Canadians go to the US now.
Mm-hmm.
They're stopping their travel. Some people can't understand why the border is such a big issue between Canada and Mexico, because the winning party kiboshed a bill that would have strengthened the
Right.
border
Right.
was it earlier this year or late last year? I think
Last year.
last year.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes no sense. People can't understand then. Is the border really an issue? Is that the
Right.
real
So
issue
why
here?
didn't you pass that bill?
Yeah, so that's happening here. Um, as I said, provinces are meeting and coming up with strategies on how to deal with it. And the last time we had these tariffs that were put on steel and aluminum and lumber, on Canada turned around and put the exact same tariff amounts on key imports from the US.
Sure. Tit for
And
tat, right?
yeah, and it matched it dollar for dollar, of which over time, over short, not very long, really, the tariffs were dropped
Hmm.
because everyone was being impacted. And now, because of some of the things that have been going on, the lead negotiator, who is the was the lead negotiator of the, I forgot the new name, but NAFTA was the old name.
Oh, right, right,
I
whatever
forgot the
they call
new,
that. Yeah.
yeah, whatever the new one is.
The new
Uh,
NAFTA.
yeah, the new NAFTA. She was also our deputy premier. Well, she resigned the other day over some of this 25% tariff stuff. I'm not sure, little bits and pieces are coming out, but I think she wanted to be a lot stronger,
Mm-hmm.
forceful against the US when it came to that, which makes sense because Donald Trump called her tough and he didn't like her during those negotiations.
He doesn't like strong women. I
No,
just
she
say
wouldn't
that.
bend. She stuck to her guns and really did a great job during those negotiations. But she left, and she was also our finance minister. So
Hmm.
now the prime minister is in a scramble to reshuffle his cabinet to fix that issue while dealing with these 25% tariffs and what to do.
Oh, and he lost his finance person. Ooh,
Yes.
time to lose
So
your finance
so
person.
it's caused lots of turmoil up here in our government as well. And we
Hmm.
know that Trudeau's uh, um, remit ends, I think, summer or fall in 2025.
Hmm.
So because we're close and he's already been reelected 3 times, I think, then it's going to look like we might as well just call it an election now. So that's
Right, I was
really,
going to say there, you guys can do that with your parliamentary procedure or
yes,
process, right? You
yeah,
can just snap election.
yeah, we can do that. So we don't know what's going on. There, we know there's a lot going on, but we don't know where it's going to land. And it's all because of the 25% tariff that came out. Of course, there's lingering other things. No one ever likes your prime minister, no matter who you vote for.
Right, right,
It doesn't matter. The person you vote for can get in the office. 6 months later, you don't like them. So,
right, right.
so who knows where things are going? So there's a lot
Mhm.
of turmoil going on up here right now.
And I mean, I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm not surprised. And I think it really is just indicative of everything we've talked about so far, is that there's so much churn in the world. And I think that goes back to what we do for a living, that we, the global we of us in this field, business, need to really understand what's happening. So I've said this a million times with you, but the issue of situational awareness is important. And I think what disturbs me is that I talk to a lot of people in our field. I talk to a lot of my clients, and they just aren't plugged in to following news or getting information. And sometimes I'll have a conversation with somebody, and I am frankly shocked that they don't know these things are going on or they don't understand what the impact to them could be. And I think I say that not to point a finger at anybody, because I know we're all busy. And at the same time, if we're not following this, that's a problem. And I think it was very reflective in our election that we just had when Trump won, because when he won, then the announcements of many of the things he plans to do were being touted. And many people were then on social media saying, well, I didn't vote for that. Well, it's like, okay, you're not following. I mean, you're following a TikTok person, or you're getting, 30% of Americans get their information from influencers.
Yeah,
What does that even mean, right? I mean, it's somebody who read the news or made it up or whatever.
usually the
20,
second part there
right,
made it
right,
up.
right, I'm sure. And then like 25% of people under the age of 25 get all of their news from TikTok. And so I'm not demeaning influencers or TikTok, but the idea is that if you don't have credible sources, how can you know really what's going on? And in the work that we do, That is so important. Even if you think that, gosh, I have one office and I'm in the middle of nowhere, if you can't get any computer chips because TSMC goes down by China moving into Taiwan, you're in deep trouble. And
Yeah.
you're going to be really sorry that you hadn't thought about things about how you might be able to look at things differently. So that's the part I keep always going back to. Wake up, people.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the sources, and I keep going back to the dog park because and people
That's
should
your
really
social network, right?
people should really join me in the dog park sometimes. We have some incredible
I think you could do
conversations.
a whole podcast there, right?
I could. But somebody was they were spouting off some conspiracy theories and saying that uh, oh, the government of Canada is taxing this and that, and just spouting things off. And he goes, I saw it on the internet, and I said, oh yeah, where? Because I already knew it was a false story. And he named it, and I said, what other sources did you look at? He goes, well, I don't need to. And I said, yeah, you do, because what you just told me was debunked. That's not true. What it is, and it had to do with some bylaw in the city of Vancouver. And
Interesting.
yet somebody had told him or rewritten it for their TikTok site or whatever site
Right.
and said the government of Canada was taxing X, Y, and Z. And it's like, that's not true. And he goes, well, how do I know what's real? I said, you got to look at more than one source. I said, go to credible
Absolutely.
sources. He goes, but I always find what I'm looking for. And I said, yeah, and you always will. I said, because if you're looking for something that
Right.
talks about people born on Tuesdays with blue eyes and red hair, something bad about them, you'll find a website that says that.
Right.
And then you know, even though it's wrong, you'll find it, so
Right.
you've got to look at more sources. So it was
Right.
interesting that you mentioned, situational awareness, and this person had none. They were just looking at one site and
Mhm.
believing it was completely true.
Well, and we've talked about this many times, the idea of dialing into your own echo chamber in particular. I have this certain kind of belief, so I'm going to follow these kinds of influencers or news outlets or whatever, and not looking to other sources. And so when I actually look at anything, I immediately then go to at least two or three other sources, mixed kind of reporting, because I need to find out really what's true. And if I find different things at different sites, then it's like, well, okay, now I need to sort of pull back and see if there's anybody that might be able to give me more broad information.
Right.
And that's so easy now because of the internet, because of social media, because of all these apps on our phone. And that is a huge problem in our industry as well, because we have individuals who are in our field that may not be as well informed as they could be. And then also, when you're thinking about crisis communications and how you get your messaging out, you need to really think about how to do that effectively, because if people are only dialing into one sort of stream, how can you get your messaging out if you're a crisis comms person? So that's a huge, huge deal.
Do you think part of it, because you mentioned it a few minutes ago, departments of one, do you think the reason why it's not that people don't want to have situational awareness, it's simply because they are a department of one and the
Mhm.
situation they only have time for is, the loaded pile of stuff they already have to do as a
Right.
department of one?
I'm sure that's true. And then that means, so how can you best utilize either technology or sort of simple things like Google Alerts. You have there's a bunch of things that you're trying to follow or understand, or you want to make sure that you're in the know about. Can you set up a series of Google Alerts, and every day Mama Google is going to send you whatever you sent? And it's not just sources in the US, they'll send you things like out of Azure and the Guardian and other things, so that you'll see what you're looking for in multiple different ways. If you have a security operations center and they actually have some monitoring of what's happening, you can also do the exact same thing with them, having set up different topics that you want to have information given to you. So there's different ways you can do it. Even if you're a person of one, you still have to read them. But the idea is, if you can boil the ocean a little bit, then you'd be better prepared overall, is
Right.
my point.
Yeah, agreed. I get different things all through the day of things to look at, and it's like, oh, what's that? And have a
I do
look at
too.
multiple sources. And sometimes you do find things where one is reporting something that the other one isn't, and then you're like, okay, let's look at a third one,
Right, exactly. That's
just in
exactly what
case.
I do.
Yeah,
Let's do the math here. Okay, 1 and 1 doesn't match up. So I need a third one. And then sometimes I even get a fourth one, because it's
yeah,
like, oh, this is too weird. Too
Yeah.
weird,
Yeah.
right?
Why don't we take a quick break?
Okay.
Okay, we are talking with Regina Phelps today about 2024 and what a wonderful year it's been. And we will be right back. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.